Let's take you back to the story where the former cabinet minister Malusi Gigaba has told the State Capture Commission in Johannesburg that he trusted board members and CEOs at SOEs. He added that it was simply a coincidence that some of those employed as executives at SOEs had links to the Guptas. Gigaba also claimed at the commission that he was not aware the Guptas were looting vast amounts of cash and had captured various state-owned entities while he was minister at 3 different government departments. Karyn Maughan is senior legal journalist at News 24 and joins us now. Karyn, a very good evening to you. So what were your thoughts, especially as I've pretty much summarized what the minister had said about his relinquishing any responsibility that he believed he carried, that it was a mere coincidence, yet he was the common denominator. What were your thoughts about the evidence that he presented to this effect?
I think his evidence was absolutely staggering, but I think it needs to be seen in the context of the evidence that's been presented by Shadow World Investigations, which demonstrates that about 57 billion rand of state contracts went to the Guptas and their network. Now, to put that in perspective, 40 billion rand of that money was linked to Transnet, the largest amount, the subsequent 6 million to Eskom, and then the Free State government. But pivotal to all of that was at the time that those Transnet contracts were concluded, Malusi Gigaba was the Minister of Public Enterprises. The locomotives deal at the time elevated from about 38 billion rand to well over 50. Regiments capital bought in, a number of Gupta entities bought in to benefit from that particular deal. And of course, instrumental to that, of course, the appointment to the bid adjudication committee of Transnet of Iqbal Sharma, who we now know is on trial, facing charges from the NPA. Gigaba, instrumental in that appointment, instrumental in the appointment of Dudu Myeni becoming the chairperson of the SAA board, instrumental in the placement of a number of other figures who were very much part of the looting, corruption, and financial irregularity that occurred over the Zuma administration, and which has had economically devastating consequences for South Africa. We also know from his wife, as well as drivers, people who work close to him, that he went to the Gupta compound on a number of occasions. He says perfectly innocently, the driver, of course, suggesting that, that he received cash from the Guptas. We know that at the time that, all of this was happening, he went publicly and stated that he'd only gone to the Gupta's house to celebrate cultural occasions like Diwali. We now know on his own evidence that his son, his newly born son, was given a piece of gold jewelry, a gold chain, by one of the Gupta brothers who he considered a friend. In the matrix of that evidence, in the matrix of the overwhelming amount of money that was involved here, for Malusi Gigaba to now step back and say his wife is simply a bitter liar, the driver is not telling the truth, that he never got money, and that he was simply a weak and innocent, bystander to the alleged corruption that occurred, that has now been documented so substantively by Shadow World, is quite remarkable.
But Karyn, he goes further than that. He talks about the fact that the boards ought to be held accountable. You're saying there were annual general meetings who could have dealt with the so-called disappearance of 57 billion rands. He also says, for instance, that he believes the regulated reports are to blame, including the lack of involvement from ministers in the awarding of contracts.
Well, it's ironic that he says that, given that he said, he himself claims that he didn't want any involvement in the kind of procurement, that was part of the position of the Department of Public Enterprises. So at one hand saying that he played no part in the procurement, on the other saying that ministers should have gotten more involved. So, it seems that there's a bit of a shifting of the goalposts in terms of his defense of his own conduct. But the fact of the matter remains that he was, he said at the tail end of his own evidence that one of his legal advisors, Mr. Mahlangu, was put in place to manage the Gupta family because of the kind of profile and role that they played within the ANC, which I thought was quite a remarkable submission. We know that, he has denied denied very vociferously that he got these cash payments, but the Gupta family had access to him in ways which he hasn't fully explained. He sought to disavow his wife's evidence that he went to the Gupta compound on far more occasions than he admitted. He has admitted that they did call him, but said, the relationship sort of drifted apart, because he was so busy. But there is clear, evidence outside that given by his wife, the Gupta leak emails, which we know the state capture inquiry intends to admit substantively into evidence so that it can be used by the NPA, that shows that, he was a pivotal part of the very appointments of board members, which he now seeks to distance himself from. And those appointments, of course, instrumental in the whole-scale capture and corruption which subsequently followed.
All right. So just before we wrap up, Karyn, I want to talk about the outcome of the CSA appeal by EFF leader Julius Malema on something that has been alleged by Thembinkosi Kgaoula and VBS, the looting there. What does it mean? How should we interpret the CSA ruling? Because there are some astonishing claims here made that the EFF leader admitted at the Central Command team that they did get or take money from VBS.
Well, this is quite a fascinating case, and we're still waiting for some form of comment from the EFF and Julius Malema on this. But essentially what happened was that Mr. Kgaoula stated in a 2019 Facebook post that, among other things, and it was a very long post, Mr. Malema had admitted to receiving money from VBS, which of course is at the center of that looting scandal, which left Limpopo pensioners and many other people in a financially dire situation and has had devastating consequences for a number of municipalities. Malema then went to the High Court in the Eastern Cape to try and interdict him from making those utterances, and to sue him for 1 million rand, and to also, basically force him to retract and apologize for that post. Now, Mr. Kgaoula deleted the post, but the court ultimately finding that there could be a possible basis of truth and the public interest for Mr. Kgaoula, and refused to grant that interdict or any of the relief, including the 1 million rand damages claim that Mr. Malema sought. The SCA now finding that was correct, the correct logic of the High Court, and essentially saying that there was adequate evidence that suggested that Kgaoula would be able to defend himself if Malema brought a full-scale defamation action against him, which we don't know if he intends to do. So essentially the court, in its majority ruling, suggesting that it was not convinced that what Kgaoula said in respect of that Facebook post was not true, was not untrue, and was not defamatory. So essentially the court saying that the Malema and the EFF failing to show that post was untrue and defamatory, and saying that its action could be wholly distinguishable from the action brought by Trevor Manuel, for example, who got a successful application for an interdict against the EFF and Malema and Floyd Shivambu after they claimed he had been, nefariously and corruptly involved in the appointment of Edward Kiswetter. As I said before, we don't know if the EFF intends to appeal that, but a far-reaching judgment which very much suggests that the court does believe that there is a case to be made that there was corrupt receipt of funds by the EFF and Malema, potentially corrupt receipt of funds by the EFF and Malema from VBS.
All right, Karyn Maughan, thank you so much for speaking to us. She is a senior legal journalist at News 24.